Mic check. 1 2 1 2. All right. We're at U Chicago EDU, the university, and let's read this about magic in the Bible. Magic. There is serious difficulty in defining the limits of what constitutes magical practice in the ancient world, and the concept of magic had culturally specific interpretations that varied across time and place. In general, magic has been understood as the attempt to influence a course of events through intentional actions beyond direct physical cause, typically of a ritual nature, performed by gods, skilled practitioners, and laity alike. Even this general description poses certain difficulties, and the broad nature of magic may necessitate dispensing with universal definitions in favor of interpretation sensitive to their cultural and temporal context. So once again, magic is such a big thing. It's hard to place it on one thing. It's such a wide thing. You know what I mean? Judgment of legitimacy was a matter of perspective, as practices considered magical by modern Western standards permeated ancient societies and had a potential legitimacy according to the accepted social norms. Considerations of black or harmful and white beneficial magic often depended entirely on who was the intended target, with magic directed against royalty punishable by death throughout iniquity, not necessarily because the practice of magic per se, but because the practice was aimed at those in positions of power. The term magic derives from Greek magikos, Latin magicus, itself a derivative of Greek magos, which refers to a Persian priestly class known for their knowledge of astrology, divination, medicine, sacrifice, science, and sorcery. Herodotus. Okay, it cites Herodotus, whatever. Depending on the time, place, or perspective of the author, this terminology was used both with and without pejorative connotations. For many cultures in iniquity, there was no differentiation between religion and magic, a distinction that became more apparent in the writings of classical authors in later eras. So we know the ancient people, magic, all these different little magical things, this was just part of their daily life. It was a part of the daily thing. Like everyone did all these weird things, which is cool. That's really cool. Okay, the Old Testament. References to magic are prevalent throughout the Old Testament corpus and occur in a variety of contexts, including those relating to daily life, religious ritual, royal consultations, prophetic calling, legal prohibition, curses, divine protection, healing oracles, and the general presence of magicians, both native and foreign. The presentation of magic and magicians is not static within the Hebrew Bible, but differs by context or according to authorial intention. As a general principle, Egypt and Babylonia are presented as the quintessential homelands of magicians and magical lore. The prominence in the Old Testament of prohibitions against magical practices suggests that they were widespread in ancient Israel, and that their potency was a matter of real concern. Despite various proscriptions, activity falling within this category remained a customary part of life. So this was a part of their daily life. It was widespread. Like I said, they wouldn't even let someone in their house unless they had this whole ritual at the threshold of a sacrifice of an animal. This was the ancient mindset. They were going to make a promise with blood. They had a whole different mindset than we do now. And it's just, this was like this their way of thinking. Their daily thing was sacrifice. And so today, all these rituals that we see in religion, they spring from the beginnings of humanity. People to this day do ritual. You know, go in a Catholic church, they have specific rituals that they have been doing for thousands of years. Go to a Protestant church, they have their own rituals. Every religious thing, even people that aren't religious, people develop rituals. Christmas is a ritual. You know, anything could really be labeled as a ritual. We all have these things that are intertwined with humanity. It doesn't make them bad. Okay. Prohibitions against magical practices are found throughout the biblical books. Deuteronomy 18:10 to 14 specifically forbids the sacrifice of a child by fire, divination, omen consultation, witchcraft, sorcery, and necromancy. The specific punishments for disobeying such prohibitions are not always specified, although consulting a spirit was punishable by stoning. Okay, so they would stone people to death back then. I mean, come on. Like, you cheat on your husband, you're getting stoned to death. Okay, is that not crazy? Which one's more evil? Trying to talk to a dead spirit or murdering someone for making a mistake? You tell me. I mean, you tell me which one's. Come on, guys. Like, do people not understand what went on in ancient days? Like, you know, shaming someone for their religious practice or for learning about magic, you know, you're just like these people who would stone people. And a lot of times, these people weren't even talking to spirits, man. A lot of times, people weren't witches. They were literally murdered for nothing, just off accusations. So, um, can we really talk to spirits? I don't know. I don't know. Like, anytime I have seen a spirit, it wasn't easy to talk to them. Okay, we're in a different in a different frequency. You know what I mean? And back then, they thought everything was a spirit. They were probably freaked out, thinking there were demons under every corner. Very superstitious, guys. On the other hand, many actions in the Old Testament that appear to resemble popular magic practices do not appear to be condemned by the biblical writers, such as Jacob's success in breeding streaked flocks by placing streaked branches before the flocks when they mated. Genesis 30:37 through 43. Based on the common occurrence of acts by the Old Testament prophets and priests that might be described as magical in nature, it seems clear that the restrictions against magic are not universal, but are meant for the non-professional who must seek the help of the chosen intermediaries with the knowledge, skill, and relationship to God that allowed them to perform incredible feats. Perhaps the best example of this is the test for an unfaithful wife. In Numbers 5, where a priest tests the suspicions of a husband by having his wife drink a potion of holy water into which were dissolved the ink text from a written curse and dust off the tabernacle floor. If guilty, the wife will suffer a number of ailments, the exact nature of which is debated and uncertain, but which include and distended abdomen. The practice of ingesting text was not limited to curses, for Ezekiel answered his prophetic calling by eating a scroll presented to him by God. Unlike in the case of the adultery curse, whose potent liquid was described as bitter, Ezekiel's scroll tastes sweet. Several protagonists in the Old Testament narratives figure prominently as authoritative magicians in their own right, with the power of dream interpretation being foremost in the cases of Joseph and Daniel. Daniel, in particular, was considered by Nebuchadnezzar to be 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. One of the most famous episodes in the Old Testament is found in Exodus 7:8 through 13, which describes the part of the magic duel between Moses, Aaron, and Pharaoh's magicians. Aaron, heeding the command of the Lord, throws his staff down before Pharaoh, and it is transformed into a snake. Pharaoh summons his magicians, who easily perform the same feat. But then Aaron's serpent summarily eats the others. Evidence for the Egyptian cultural background of this tale is attested in the archaeological record. Actual bronze and wooden wands in the form of serpents have been discovered in the Egyptian tombs from the Middle Kingdom to the Late Period. These wands would have acted as ritual implements used to ward off snakes. The forked end represented the W3S scepter had the practical advantage of being used to restrain snakes against the ground. Such material remains demonstrate the biblical author's familiarity with the practices of snake charmers. See also Psalm 58, Ecclesiastes 10, and Jeremiah 8. The magicians of the pharaohs in Old Testament texts are referred to by the Hebrew term haratam, borrowing and shortening of the Egyptian title chief lector priest, one who carries the festival scroll. The Old Testament also preserves a bewildering array of other terminology used to identify magicians, including man of God, exorcist, one who binds a spell, and enchanter of snakes. Another magical episode involving serpents and a possible Egyptian cultural background occurs in Numbers 21, 4 through 9, when the people of Israel speak out against the Lord and Moses on account of their conditions in the desert. The Lord sends among them venomous snakes, the bites of which kill many. Upon repenting, Moses is instructed by the Lord to fashion a bronze serpent and to erect it on a pole upon which those who had been bitten by the snake could gaze in order to be cured via the concept of sympathetic magic. Now, let me tell you something. Almost every person in the world does sympathetic magic every day and doesn't know it. Everyone does sympathetic magic and they have no idea that they're doing it. When you copy your favorite celebrity, you're doing sympathetic magic. When you copy someone or you do something you see, it's simply sympathetic magic. According to 2 Kings 18:4, in a campaign against idolatry, Hezekiah destroyed the bronze snake constructed by Moses because the people had continually been making incense offerings to it. Actual examples of bronze serpents have been excavated in or near the cultural areas of Megiddo, Gezer, Hazor, Shechem, Tel Mevorah, and Timnah. Snake cults would have given people an opportunity to propitiate the patron deities of serpents in an effort to reduce biting incidents. Now, see, here's the thing. Idolatry, people get into idolatry. They're putting their power in the wrong place because where's God? God dwells in you. You don't need to worship a stone and ask the stone. The power of God's in you. If you ask and you are upright, it'll be given to you. And here's the other thing. Idolatry is the same thing as carrying a rabbit's foot and believing it's lucky. What makes it lucky is your belief. You don't need the rabbit's foot, okay? People use these instruments to get themselves to believe. So they're believing on the item instead of believing in themselves and believing in God. They would believe in the item. So that's the big problem with this. The item isn't alive, but the Spirit of God and your spirit is alive, okay? In 1979, extraordinary archaeological evidence for the use of magical amulets in ancient Israel was found at the site of Ketef Hinnom in Jerusalem. Among deposits from a group of chambers in a cave tomb were discovered 2 silver amulets inscribed with Hebrew text of an apotropaic nature, focused on the blessings and protection of Yahweh. Portions of the text on these silver scrolls, which were rolled up after being inscribed, parallel phrases in the priestly blessing from Numbers 6:24 through 26. If the amulets dating to 600 BC is correct, they represent some of the earliest attested Hebrew texts with known associations to the Old Testament, comparable to similar blessings inscribed on a storage jar. Like I told you, in these books, when you're reading Psalms and Proverbs and the Bible, these are blessings, these are affirmations, these are basically spells that you read and affirm to yourself, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. That is an affirmation, okay? These are blessings, okay? So, yes, they would write these down and roll them up in little scrolls and carry them with them and put them in amulets. I'm telling you, man, the Bible is a magical book, and many people know that. These amulets conform to the use of text and metal for their magical power to protect the dead in whose tombs they were discovered. Several Old Testament passages refer to the use of such talismans and defensive devices. Magic was especially important in the healing of disease and sickness that had supernatural causes. If dangers could not be warded off, they could be transferred to a host and banished. These so-called scapegoat rituals of Leviticus 16:7-22 involved Aaron's confession of Israel's sins over a live goat that was subsequently released into the wilderness, taking the sins of the people with it. A similar treatment for leprosy involved an elaborate ritual with the use of birds and lambs, Leviticus 14. Transference expulsion rituals are known from across the ancient Near East, including the Hittite Ambazi and the Zui rituals, which involved a mouse and a puppy respectively, as well as the Mesopotamian evil demons. Incantations, which involved a goat. A reworking of such an expulsion rite probably lies behind the story in 1 Samuel 5-6, in which the Philistines, having been plagued by tumors and rats after taking the Ark of the Covenant, returned the Ark along with 5 gold tumors and 5 gold rats as a guilt offering on the advice of their priest. A similar rite is attested at Ugarit in KTU, which describes the god El fashioning an image of King Keret in order to cure him. Individuals could seek help of the designated healers or direct help from God for treatment of various bodily afflictions or plagues. And the help of a magician was often needed to combat the curses of another wizard. Okay, it's just like when these Christians talk about crystals. Well, the priest of Aaron wore these crystal plates on their chest. Okay, the Bible says there's buildings made of diamonds and crystals in heaven. Like, come on. The throne is made of sapphire. Like, people need to read and study more, I guess. I don't know, but you have to understand these people's daily life. You know, what they were like. They were all magicians. What do you think all these priest groups were doing? Like, what do you think it was like back then? So, it's very interesting once you start understanding how deep this stuff is. And how deep and old a lot of these stories were passed down by mouth before they were written down. And the ancient people had a magical mindset.